The history of English football is often recorded through the prism of its major metropolitan centres, the dominant dynasties of Merseyside, and the glitz of the modern Premier League era. In this retold narrative, the true essence of the 1970s game can occasionally be lost. It was a decade characterized not just by the brutal physicality of the pitches, but by a select group of players who possessed a level of spatial intelligence and technical sophistication that defied the era's tactical rigidity. Among these underappreciated artists of the English game, few figures loom as large to those who witnessed them, yet remain as criminally overlooked by modern retrospectives as Jimmy Greenhoff. To the casual historian, Greenhoff might appear as a nomadic forward who moved between Leeds United, Birmingham City, Stoke City, and Manchester United. But to describe him merely as a journeyman is to fundamentally misunderstand his impact. Jimmy Greenhoff was a visionary attacker, a player whose movement, versatility, and peerless footballing intelligence made him years ahead of his time and undeniably better than the history books care to remember. To understand why Greenhoff's legacy has been unfairly muted, one must first look at the unique trajectory of his early career. Coming through the ranks at Leeds United under the legendary Don Revie in the mid-1960s, Greenhoff was part of a squad that was rapidly becoming the most formidable and controversial force in the country. At Leeds, he was surrounded by world-class talent, playing alongside the likes of Billy Bremner, Johnny Giles, and Peter Lorimer. It was in this hyper-competitive crucible that Greenhoff developed his foundational footballing DNA. Revie's Leeds demanded absolute tactical discipline and work rate, but Greenhoff offered something distinct, a subtle, fluid creativity. He scored the winning goal in the 1968 Intercities Fairs Cup final against Ferencváros, a moment that should have cemented his status as a cornerstone of the emerging Leeds dynasty. However, a combination of Revie's tactical reshuffling and the sheer abundance of attacking options meant that Greenhoff was often utilised as a utility man rather than the focal point. His departure to Birmingham City in 1968 for a club record fee was a shock, but it set the stage for his true evolution as a footballer. It was during his subsequent move to Stoke City in 1969 that Greenhoff truly blossomed into the player that defined a generation on the Potteries. Under the management of Tony Waddington, Stoke was constructing a side that rejected the prevailing trend of direct, physical English football in favour of a deeply technical passing style. Waddington recognised that Greenhoff was not a traditional, bruising number 9, nor was he a conventional out-and-out winger. Instead, Greenhoff was deployed in a role that modern tacticians would recognise as a false 9 or an advanced playmaker operating in the hole between the midfield and the attack. This was the golden era of Greenhoff's career. Paired with the physical presence of John Ritchie and fed by the wing wizardry of a veteran Sir Stanley Matthews in training and later the brilliant Alan Hudson in matches, Greenhoff became the orchestrator of the most entertaining side in the country. Greenhoff's genius at Stoke lay in his extraordinary movement off the ball. In the 1970s, central defenders were trained to mark zonally or strictly man-mark the opposing centre-forward. They expected a physical battle within the width of the penalty box. Greenhoff completely dismantled this defensive paradigm. He would drop deep into midfield, dragging his marker out of position and creating vast chasm-like spaces for his teammates to exploit. If the defender refused to follow him, Greenhoff would turn in space and unleash his exceptional passing range, launching pinpoint diagonals to the flanks or slipping subtle through balls into the channels. He possessed a rare panoramic vision of the pitch. While the modern game celebrates players like Dennis Bergkamp or Roberto Firmino for their ability to link play between lines, Jimmy Greenhoff was executing these exact concepts in the mud and fury of the old First Division. His technical proficiency was matched by an incredible athletic grace. Greenhoff was a master of the volley and the half-volley, possesses a kinetic timing that allowed him to strike the ball with immense power and accuracy while completely off balance. His goals were rarely scrambled tap-ins, they were aesthetic. Masterpieces, acrobatic volleys from the edge of the box, bullet headers arriving from deep, and delicate chips over advancing goalkeepers. His performance in the 1972 League Cup semi-final and subsequent final victory over Chelsea remains the pinnacle of Stoke City's history. Greenhoff was the catalyst for that triumph, providing the creative spark and the big-game temperament that lifted the club to its first major trophy. For a 4-year period at Victoria Ground, he was widely regarded by his peers as one of the most complete and unstoppable forwards in British football. Yet despite this domestic dominance, Greenhoff's international recognition was non-existent. He belongs to a tragic pantheon of 1970s English mavericks who were completely ignored by successive England managers. Sir Alf Ramsey, and later Don Revie himself at international level, favoured a highly structured, rigid system that prioritised physical industry and predictable roles. There was a profound institutional distrust of players who could not be easily categorised. Because Greenhoff was neither a traditional target man like Malcolm MacDonald nor a pure goalscorer like Alan Clark, international setups viewed his versatility as a luxury rather than an asset. The fact that Jimmy Greenhoff never earned a senior cap for England remains one of the most egregious scouting failures in the history of the national team. It is a primary reason why his name is often omitted from global discussions of the era's great players. Without the currency of World Cup appearances or international caps, a player's legacy inevitably becomes localized. The second act of Greenhoff's legendary status occurred in 1976, when Tommy Docherty brought him to Manchester United. At TD, 30 years old, many believed Greenhoff's best days were behind him, but his move to Old Trafford proved to be a masterclass in veteran intelligence. Docherty was building a young, vibrant and incredibly fast side, featuring the likes of Steve Coppell, Gordon Hill and Jimmy's own younger brother, Brian Greenhoff. The manager recognized that this youthful exuberance needed an experienced, calming anchor at the top of the pitch. Jimmy Greenhoff was the missing piece of the puzzle. He formed an immediate, almost telepathic partnership with Stuart Pearson. Where Pearson was the industrious, hard-running striker, Greenhoff was the sophisticated conductor. His impact on Manchester United's younger players was transformative. He taught a young team how to manage the tempo of a game, when to retain possession, and how to use movement to manipulate defensive lines. The peak of this late-career renaissance arrived in the 1977 FA Cup final against Bob Paisley's Liverpool. Liverpool was on the verge of an unprecedented treble, having already won the league and preparing for the European Cup final in Rome. They were considered heavily favoured and tactically superior. But Greenhoff produced a performance of selfless, tactical perfection. He scored the winning goal, a deflected effort off his chest from a Lou Macari shot. But his contribution was far greater than just the statistic. He systematically occupied Liverpool's legendary central defenders, Alan Hansen and Phil Thompson, preventing them from building play from the back and disrupting the rhythm of the entire Merseyside machine. It was a victory built on Greenhoff's intelligence, giving Manchester United one of their most cherished modern trophy triumphs. The reason Greenhoff is rarely mentioned among the absolute greatest today is largely a structural product of the media era he inhabited. The 1970s was a period before the saturation of sports broadcasting, before every touch was logged by data analysts, and before YouTube could preserve a player's entire catalogue in high-definition highlight reels. To truly appreciate Greenhoff, you had to be in the stands. You had to see the runs he made that didn't result in a pass, the subtle blocks he made to free up his winger, and the constant verbal instructions he gave to his midfielders. His greatness was woven into the collective fluid motion of the teams he played for. When a player's main attribute is their intelligence and their ability to make others better, their legacy is always the first to fade when the generation that watched them passes away. Furthermore, Greenhoff's career lacked the singular, dominant club identity that often keeps a player's name alive in the modern heritage industry. He is adored by Stoke City fans as a god. He is revered by Manchester United fans of a certain vintage as a legendary cup hero. He is respected by Leeds United purists as a brilliant product of their greatest era. But because his peak was divided across these different institutions, he lacks the monolithic backing of a single powerhouse marketing machine to constantly champion his place in history. He was a nomad, not because he was unwanted, but because his unique skill set was constantly sought after by managers who realized they needed an injection of pure footballing brains to complete their tactical puzzles. Ultimately, the documentary of Jimmy Greenhoff is a story of a player who defied the limitations of his environment. He played in an era of terrible pitches, brutal tackles, and tactical conservatism, yet he performed with the vision, touch, and intelligence of a modern, continental forward. He was a playmaker in a striker's shirt, a footballer who understood that space was the most valuable commodity on the pitch and that the mind was the most powerful weapon. His absence from the standard lists of greatest of all time is not a reflection of his ability, but a failure of modern historical memory. For those who value the intellectual beauty of the game, the perfect layout of a counterattack, the sublime timing of a late run into the box, and the selflessness of a teammate who plays for the badge rather than the headline, Jimmy Greenhoff remains a titan. He was the silent architect of some of the most iconic team performances of the 1970s, a player who didn't need the validation of an England cap to be the smartest man on the pitch, and a footballer who was, in every measurable sense, far better than the world chooses to remember.